Hi everyone, it's me, Tim. Today I want to answer another question. This one from 8scoma94 who asks, can you tell me what is the difference between a lead position and a so-called not lead position? Sure, I can do that. Now this is something that has changed a bit over time, but I'd say it's been pretty stable like this for about the last 20 years. And it's very similar for artists and designers and people in the sound department and production. So I'm going to describe it for the one I'm most familiar with, which is programmer. And I'll try to get very detailed with what it is, and then you'll see how that maps over to the other departments. I'm going to start at the top with the lead, and I'll go down to all the various subcategories. So let's start with the lead programmer. The lead programmer is the person who's in charge of all the programmers who are working on one particular game. He answers to the game director, who I've talked about in other videos. The game director is the one who kind of keeps the vision of the game in his or her head. He or she is the one who wrote most of the initial documents about here's what the setting's like, here's what the story's like, here's what mechanics I want. And then the lead step in and start doing what I call the realization of that. The lead designer may step in and write design documents that can be implemented by a programmer, and the artist steps in and starts doing having concept art done and deciding what the art style of the game is going to be. The lead programmer at this point would step in and look at all of the modules this game is going to need. This game is going to need NPCs, and some of those NPCs are creatures, and a lot of those creatures aren't bipedal or quadrupedal, and it's going to need inventory, and it's going to need spells. Maybe it's going to need horses or ships or fast travel. There's going to be different towns. This is how instances are going to be set up. This is all things that the lead has to do right at the beginning of the game to try to establish how everything's going to be coded. While the game is actually in development, in addition to still doing these things, because these things change, the lead programmer meets with the other leads and the director. This is where they coordinate what's going on. This usually happens about once a week. This is where they have to be very good at talking to people who are not programmers. So you have to be the type of programmer who can stop talking in programmerese, because you're talking to a lead artist and a lead designer and a lead musician and the production lead. And they're not going to understand all the nitty gritty. Now, I've often said I love it when people in other departments learn how to code or learn some stuff about how art's done, because it makes those meetings flow better. But the lead programmer ultimately is responsible for those other leads and the director understanding what is going on in programming. The lead programmer frequently structures code, meaning he's already broken up the game into very high-level modules and decides what's going to be done in those. He's the one who schedules the programmers, meaning he assigns them to these different things. He may give them estimates, or he may just confirm the estimates that come up through the senior programmers, and I'll talk about that. He, of course, is responsible for managing this entire group, so he writes the reviews for the people in his programming department. Some of those reviews may get written by the seniors, and then he signs off on them, and if he agrees with them. He also handles any issues both within his department and between his department and other departments. So if there are two programmers, let's say I have two senior programmers arguing over how something should be coded, he may step in. Let's say the art director or the lead artist comes and says, I'm having problems with one of your programmers. He has to take care of that. For many people, for many programmers, being the lead programmer is the end goal. It's what they want to do. For some of them, being the lead programmer is their step towards being a game director. By the way, often, and I'm finding this more and more, often lead programmers being changed to programming director, because then they're saying that underneath the leads are becoming specialized. So you may have a lead network programmer and a lead graphics programmer, And because of that, you may call the lead overall programmer, maybe called a programming director. It's no different than what I just described. It's just kind of a naming convention to distinguish them from specialist leads. And let me talk about specialists for a second. Like I mentioned in a previous video, this has arisen more and more in the industry that programmers are specializing in things like gameplay or networking or graphics or UI or, there's any number of specialties that can happen. If you're really good at that, but you don't want to manage, several companies have created something called principal programmer. So you're a principal graphics programmer, you're a principal networking programmer. This is almost always a specialist, but they don't manage people. They don't have any programmers under them, and they're entirely responsible for some section of the game code, the one within their specialty. Usually, they have little to no oversight from the lead programmer because within that specialty, they're the last word. They're the one who's working out, this is exactly how our networking code is going to work. They report to the lead. They let the lead know how things are going, what's available, what the general API will be, in other words, the interface to the other programmers, so that the lead can direct other people who will be using that code. But the principal usually has, all the responsibility and authority within that code section. So I often see them as adjacent to the lead, but not quite under, but in a non-managerial way. So let's talk about senior programmers. Senior programmers, they manage the staff level and juniors more hands-on than the lead will. Senior programmers often, this is where specialization begins. This is where somebody will decide, I've been doing programming for a while. I think I want to do gameplay. I think I want to do graphics. It doesn't make sense to have like a junior network programmer because when somebody is specialized, you kind of assume they know what they're doing, and a junior may not know that. So senior is where you start seeing these specializations be attached to their title. So you may have a senior network programmer, or a senior graphics programmer. Senior programmers are responsible for structuring their own code, and anyone who reports to them. They're the one who decides, for example, what algorithms they're going to use, what the programming interface, the API, will look like. They give their own time estimates for their code. They review the time estimates of the people who are working under them to see if they make sense. Seniors often are the ones that lead, and I know that's a little confusing, strike teams. Strike teams are things that arise during development where there's a particular part of the game that needs close attention for a while, especially if you're trying to decide the best way to handle certain things. We often had strike teams for things like combat, UI. If there's a multiplayer section of the game, it usually got a strike team. And these are groups of multidisciplinary people. It may be a programmer or two, an artist or two, a designer or two, somebody from audio. And this group does rapid iteration in that area to decide, okay, this is the best way to proceed. We're going to do this. Sometimes after they're done, the strike team ends and they go and implement all that. But frequently, they implement and keep meeting to make sure the implementation is going the way they expected it to. What's great about this is usually some member of production, one of the producer or an assistant producer, will go to these strike teams to keep track of all the new tasks that they're creating, especially tasks for things like, oh, we need extra art that we didn't plan for, or, ooh, there's a whole family of sound effects that are going to be needed because we just added all these particle effects, which is a bunch of new art we need for this section of combat. So seniors usually run those strike teams. The senior programmers, the goal of a senior programmer is to learn how to work well with non-programmers. This is where the lead programmer gets it from these strike teams. You're learning how to interact and talk and manage and direct people who are not programmers. This is where you often, at the senior level, figure out whether you're going to go up to be lead or go to be a principal. Because if you're not good at managing, principal is going to be it for you. By the way, a lot of people think they're good at managing and then they're not good at managing. It's sort of like people who think they're good at DMing and then they're not good at DMing. It's just a thing. And I don't know whether it's teachable. Most people I know are just good at it naturally, but I'm sure there are classes that can help people manage better. The next level is interesting. I called it staff, like staff programmer. Frequently, I see companies that don't put any prefix on this, and then it means if you're a programmer, you're at the level between senior and junior. A staff programmer is someone who has professional experience on something. So I often see people come in from school, or they've made a couple demos on their own and they want to be a senior or a lead. I'm like, no. You'll probably be a junior. At best, you will be a staff. Because I want to see how you handle this role of doing professional game code. This is the goal of this. You're on your way to be a senior. Staff programmers are where you have learned to manage juniors, although you have a senior who's watching you do that and going along with you. You learn to structure your own code, meaning you're deciding the API and you're deciding the algorithm to use, but with oversight from your senior. The goal is to become a senior and learn how to structure code on your own, estimate your time on your own, and manage other programmers on your own. Finally, there's the junior programmer. Junior programmers are people who already know how to code. The industry is not there to teach you how to code. They are people who come in who have little to no professional experience. They're usually given very specific functions or methods to write. They're told what the expectation is, how long it will take to write them, so they don't make their own estimates. They're usually told, here's something I want you to do. It will take you a week. I want you to use this algorithm, or maybe this one, whatever one you are comfortable with and think will work better. The code is reviewed regularly, sometimes by a staff, sometimes by a senior, very rarely by the lead themselves. The goal of a junior is to learn how to write your own code, debug your own code, optimize your own code through all the stages of the life cycle of a game. When you master that, then you can go on to be a staff programmer. Now, as you go up these tiers, of course, salary goes up, but I hope from what I described, you also know responsibilities go up too. If a piece of code is written with a bad API or a bad algorithm, you usually don't go blame the juniors. You usually go talk to the staff or the senior that decided on that. Some companies, especially really big ones like Microsoft, have multiple tiers inside each one of these levels that I described to you. So there may be a junior programmer level 3 or a senior programmer level 1. And the reason these exist is it's frequently the case now where you spend a few years at each tier, but you still want to get a salary increase and you want to be promoted. And people want to be able to distinguish a junior programmer that's been there 3 years from a junior programmer that was hired last month. So they often instigate these levels. So you know the higher levels has more experience than the lower level. Now, within all of this, I've described that people are learning how to manage. My experience is good managers are becoming rarer, harder to find, or unwilling to step into management roles. I see more and more seniors wanting to be principals than leads. I'm not sure why this is. I'm not sure if the industry has changed. I'm not sure if people have changed. However, I have noticed frequently that those who are willing and want to step up to be a manager are often those who are the most unsuitable. They have no experience doing it. They have no personal skills. The people who worked under them did not like working under them in any way. They're often too cautious or obstructionist, or they really see going into management as a way of getting their own ideas expressed in the game. So in other words, they don't want to be a manager because they're good at managing or they want to manage. They view it as a way of then overriding everybody under them so their own ideas go in. These make bad managers. So the hope and goal of having this hierarchy is by the time someone becomes a senior and starts managing people, you should already have a good idea of how good they are at it. And it's also another reason why When I've had people who are straight out of university and they're like, I want to be a senior, I'm like, no, no. I need to see you in action before you can jump up to something like that. There's other things that have changed over time. I see people's code abilities have changed. I've worked with some really amazing programmers. I've seen people who specialize very quickly. They seem to know what they want to do, and they've already looked into all the different specialties, even while they're a junior. I've also seen people who don't really know how to optimize and don't know how the compiler even works. They seem to not know what all these flags are for and how to use them and how to restrict their use to a small section of code. So I'm not saying it's better or worse. It certainly has changed over time. But the tiers I just described of lead, senior, staff, and junior have pretty much been in place and fairly frozen for a couple decades. So I think it's safe to say you're going to find that at almost any company you would go to. So I hope this answers the question, and I hope it gives you a little insight in how the games are made.